Howdy guys, welcome to episode 14 of the Microsoft AZ-800 course. The topic of today's video is Azure Active Directory, as I'm sure you've already seen in the title or thumbnail of this video. Now with regard to this topic, we're going to start things off by discussing a few basic things you need to know before the rest of the stuff in this course will make sense. The first thing we'll discuss is obviously what is Azure Active Directory. You all already probably have a fair idea of what Azure is in general if you've watched some of my other videos. So you already know things like it's a cloud platform and all that. But what is the Azure Active Directory part of it? Azure Active Directory is going to be one of the more important topics in this course. So it's very important that you folks understand it and that you understand it well. The course you're watching, being the AZ-800, is one of the new server courses which have exams associated to them. But unlike in the past, where server courses was, for the most part, well, just about server, these new server courses are obviously not just about server. They contain a lot of cloud content. In this case, specifically about Azure, and even more specifically about things like Azure Active Directory and other things like virtualization, which is for the most part going to be about things like virtual machines. Now, I do want to point out though that the Azure side of things in this course is not just limited to Azure Active Directory and virtual machines, but those are some of the main key points you need to understand very well to be able to attempt these exams. Well, at least the AZ-800 exam, that is. The AZ-801 exam, whole different can of worms, and it has its own set of objectives and obviously has its own set of skills that's going to be measured. That's a story for a different day though, so let's focus on today's topic first. The second thing we'll be discussing regarding this topic, being the Azure Active Directory, is the Azure Active Directory Benefits. Alright folks, let's jump right into the first topic here on the list, which was what is Azure Active Directory? So the first thing we're going to mention here about AzureAD is that it's obviously still a central point of authentication. It's now just, well, in the cloud. All devices will still authenticate to a central point. This has now simply just moved to the cloud. Still the same thing, it's just in the cloud, folks. The interesting thing here, though, is most companies I've come across don't actually use a fully cloud Active Directory. Majority of the companies I work with have what we call a hybrid Active Directory. Now, if you don't know what that means, it's basically when a company still has their good old-fashioned Active Directory on premises, but at the same time, they now also have one in the cloud on Microsoft Azure. And they've now obviously just synchronized these two Active Directories with one another. So in simple terms, if you or your company have an Active Directory on premises, as well as have one in the cloud on Microsoft Azure, and you've synchronized these two, that is what we call a hybrid Active Directory. There are actually many benefits to that, but that's a topic obviously for a different video in this course. So we'll do that at a later stage in this video course. Now getting back to the topic at hand, what can we say about having Azure Active Directory? It's a cloud identity provider. It's also a cloud-based access management system. Okay, so based on what we've said so far, we can say that the Azure Active Directory is a cloud platform. And if you don't know what cloud is, please go and look at the first videos in this course, or maybe go and have a look at some of the other videos on my channel. There's actually lots of videos that covers that topic of cloud. Now, besides Azure Active Directory being a cloud platform, to be more specific, it's an example of platform as a service. PaaS for short. Now, platform as a service is a type of public cloud, and when it comes to public cloud, you get things like software as a service, you get things like infrastructure as a service, and you obviously get things like platform as a service, which is the one we're discussing right now. And Azure Active Directory would obviously be a very good example of platform as a service. So what does it mean though when we say it's platform as a service? Well, with all forms of cloud, you always relinquish some level of control. And in this case, it's no different. If we look at a normal, typical Active Directory environment that you would have on premises or that you would have to create on premises, what would you need to do to create that? You would need to create yourself or get yourself a physical or a virtual server first. Once you've got that, that's going to obviously take a lot of time and potentially cost you a lot of money in some cases, especially if it's physical. You still need to go and install Windows Server now on that machine. When you have that out of the way, you will need to add a role on the server, which is the ADDS role. It stands for Active Directory Domain Services, for those of you folks that don't know that yet. When you have this role installed, you still need to go and promote the server and create your domain, etc., etc. The point here is it's going to take a very long time, and I didn't even mention that you will need to go and probably install and configure all kinds of other nonsense like Windows updates and so on. Now, getting back to the topic of platform as a service, if you have your Active Directory on Azure, you don't need to go and create a server. Not physically, not virtually, you don't need to go and create a server. You don't need to install any roles. No updates either. You can pretty much just jump right in and get straight down to business. How's that for performance? Something interesting about Azure Active Directory though is you might actually already be using it and just not know it yet. There are actually lots of things out there that make use of Azure Active Directory already. If you, for example, make use of things like Skype, Outlook, OneDrive, and many, many more, all of those connect to Azure Active Directory. Whether you've got it or not, they all actually connect to an Azure Active Directory using your Live ID, which nowadays is not necessarily called a Live ID. I've seen in some cases Microsoft calls it an online account. Sometimes they call it a Microsoft account, but most commonly it's known as a Live ID. Now, using that, they connect to the Azure Active Directory. Now, when you go onto the Azure portal and you go to the Azure Active Directory itself, there you can now go and take control and you'll have access to way more configuration options and settings. Now, just because it's in a cloud doesn't mean you can't do anything. You still actually have a lot of control when it comes to Azure Active Directory, and the amount of things you can do and the amount of things you can go and configure, quite frankly, is mind-boggling. It's just insane. So since we're talking so much about Azure Active Directory and the Azure portal, some of you folks might be wondering how you can access this on the Azure portal if you've never actually seen it or played with it. Well, it's actually very easy and straightforward. All you need to do to access the Azure Active Directory on the Azure portal is, first of all, go to the portal. Now, there's the current address for you guys. So if you want, you can go and use that, or you can just go run a search for it in your favorite search engine, something like Google. Doesn't really matter, whatever floats your boat. Once you log in, on the left-hand side of the portal, you'll have access to what we call the navigation menu. In that navigation menu, you're just going to go and simply look for Azure Active Directory, and voila, you're there. It's really that easy, folks. Now, I think what's going to help with this is if I quickly show you guys a very quick demo on the actual Azure portal itself on where you can find this and what it actually looks like. So just give me a second. All right, here we are on the Microsoft Azure portal. Now, once you land on this page, all it's left to do is for you to locate the navigation menu on the left. Now, yes, I said it's on the left, but you still need to actually go and open it. And this can be done by clicking on the top left-hand side here. So if I just go there with my mouse cursor and you click there, that is going to open what we call the navigation menu. Now, fun fact here is this used to actually be called the hub up until about 5 years ago or so. It could have actually been longer. And it actually used to be locked in place up until about 2 years ago, 3 years ago or so. So at some point, Microsoft decided to have this disappear on its own. So once I click anywhere on this page, you can actually see it disappears now. And normally when Microsoft does stuff like that, it actually annoys me. But in this case, I'm actually happy they did that because it gives you more room to work with, especially if you're working on a very small computer screen like a laptop perhaps. Let's go back to that navigation menu. Once you open this navigation menu, whatever you see here is not necessarily everything you can go and do on the Azure portal. This is just some of the most common things people would go and do on the Azure portal. You can go and pin things here, you can go and drag them around. If you don't find what you're looking for, you might have to go here where it says all services, or to create a resource, or alternatively to here the search bar and just run a search for that component. Now, what are we here for? We are here for the Azure Active Directory. That is where you find it. Now, that is obviously a platform as a service example, as we've said earlier. But another way you can have Active Directory in the cloud is to go and make yourself a virtual machine, which is an example of infrastructure as a service. And once you've made that virtual machine, you can obviously go and install server. And on that server, you can go and add the ADDS role, and you can just go and do it the old-fashioned way like you would do on premises. So it's still on the cloud, except that one at least gives you a little bit more control. Infrastructure as a service is the one that gives you the most amount of control over your cloud environment. Platform as a service, you've got way less control, but you also have way less issues you've got to worry about. I mean, that's one of the benefits of the cloud, is the fact that it's Microsoft's problem and not your problem. It's someone else's problem. So I'm going to go click here on Azure Active Directory, and that is what it would more or less look like. I'm saying more or less because depending on when you're watching this, it might not look like this. If you're watching this maybe a month after or a year after I've uploaded this video, it might actually look different because Microsoft is continuously changing the platform, like very rapidly. It's hard to keep track of it all. So it's very important you keep track of when the videos was uploaded, because if they were uploaded too long ago, like 2 years ago, then whatever you see in that video, it might not look like that. The theory might still be solid, but the examples as to where something is and what it would look like might not be solid anymore, because that's obviously changed. Cloud is continuously changing at a very rapid pace. So we're not going to go into any of these topics specifically today. That's going to be a different video. So we're going to be discussing users and groups and all of these things at a later stage in a different video. Otherwise, this video is going to be too long. And I did promise that I'm going to do these videos in bite-sized chunks. Otherwise, it's going to get too long. It's going to be very difficult for you to consume the knowledge if it's going to be too long. All right, so let's get back to the presentation. Okay, here we are. And now we're going to be looking at or discussing the second topic on the list, which was obviously Azure Active Directory Benefits. Now, in the benefits section, the first thing we're going to be talking about is high availability. High availability is something you'll have with almost everything in the cloud, especially when it comes to Microsoft Azure. With a lot of components on Azure, not just Azure's Active Directory, Microsoft gives us a 99.9% uptime guarantee. Now, what does that mean? So that means they give you 2 or more of everything. So in real life, we can also go do this on premises, but it's very difficult and quite frankly, very expensive. So if you have to have 2 or more of everything in case one of those 2 things might fail, it's not that we can't do it, it's just, well, it's pricey to go and do that. So the cloud, remember, whose problem is this? It's Microsoft's problem. They are paying for all the hardware and they're maintaining it in the background. You basically just get to come in here at the last minute and reap the benefits for the most part. So they will have 2 or more servers, 2 or more internet connections, 2 or more switches, 2 or more of everything. So should one of the hard drives go offline, should a RAM chip fail, should a server fail, should one of the internet connections fail, that is not a problem. The service is effectively still going to be available. Whatever service is being rendered, or this could be a website, it could be a server, it could be anything for that matter. Whatever the service is, it's not going to be offline or unavailable. Effectively, what we want to achieve here is the users or the clients should be none the wiser. They shouldn't know there's a problem. They don't need to know, quite frankly, in my opinion. So that's what high availability is, and Azure Active Directory definitely gives you that. Now you can actually go and add extra high availability options, but that's a topic for a different video. Something else we get with the Azure Active Directory is redundancy. Now, there's a lot of confusion between high availability and fault tolerance and redundancy. High availability and fault tolerance are very much the same. We're not talking about fault tolerance though. Redundancy also very much the same, but I would say high availability is when something is a hot standby. So if one server were to go offline, if you had 2, the other one was already up and running, it was a hot standby, and the users would not know there was a problem at all. The service never actually was offline for whatever reason. Redundancy is normally like a switch you have to go and flip. So you have something on standby, you have a backup, if you want to go and call it that. But generally, it involves something that needs to be brought up first. So if there's a second server, you'd have to go and turn it on first, or bring it up first, or have to go and turn, flip a switch, so to speak, digitally. So it's very much the same as high availability, but I would say this is more like a warm standby, not a hot standby. It's on standby, but someone has to go and turn it on first and say, hey, wake up, you're up. So yeah. Then you also have the cloud aspect. Now, obviously, Azure Active Directory is cloud. That is not something new to us. But you need to remember, where is this Active Directory? It is in the cloud, folks. The cloud means it's somewhere else on someone else's property. And it's online, effectively. The fact that your Active Directory is online, it's on the internet, thus for that matter, that means your users, your clients, effectively has the ability to join this domain from anywhere in the world. This domain is normally referred to as an Azure domain. So your users, your clients, or even external people, if they need to join your domain for whatever reason, they can join your Azure domain from anywhere in the world as long as they've got valid credentials. They can also authenticate from anywhere. Normally, under default circumstances, your server would have been on premises, your good old-fashioned on-premises Active Directory, and your users with their laptops or desktops or whatever they have would also normally, for the most part, be on premises. Now, yes, there's exceptions to this rule. Obviously, they can be offsite, they can go and use a VPN and all that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about default circumstances. So by default, your domain would normally be on premises, and by default, your users would be on premises, and they would normally authenticate against that server. So if they wanted to be somewhere else, let's say they wanted to go and work from home because of COVID-19, or well, this is actually the 21st century, that's what things are happening now. People are working from home. So if they wanted to go and do that, they cannot just go and do that. They would have to set up some sort of VPN or something like that so they could go and authenticate against the Active Directory on premises. Now that's an old story. Now we don't have to go and do that anymore, not if you don't want to. You can go and authenticate or have your users authenticate against the Active Directory in the cloud. So there's obviously many other benefits comes along with this, but those are topics obviously for a later video. We don't want to go too deep too quickly, otherwise we're going to lose some folks along the way. So this course is specifically designed for both people that's brand new in IT as well as people that's been doing this for quite some time. So obviously the first few videos, as you guys can see, is starting with the basics. That's obviously for the folks that's brand new to server and brand new to Azure. And as we go along in this course, the topics are going to keep getting deeper and deeper and more technical and more technical. And I would not recommend, to the new guys jumping to a video in the end of the course. Otherwise, some of those topics might not make sense. If you're someone that's already got some experience in IT and you've been doing this for quite some time and you just want to see what's new, then obviously feel free to jump ahead and go and watch one of those videos. Now, another benefit you also get is managing access to applications. So using your Azure Active Directory, which is now in the cloud, you can go and manage who's got access to what application or what resource. How cool is that? So that is not something new on its own, but this is just another way for you to go and do that. One of my personal favorite benefits here is the fact that I can go and control what aspects or what conditions my users need to meet before they'll have access to my environment or my resources. It's basically like a compliancy scan, if you want to go and call it something. So these conditions include, but are not limited. Wow, I sound like a marketer or some kind, or like I'm selling something. So they include, but are not limited to, things like your users have to use a desktop or a laptop, for example. They have to maybe, for example, use a Microsoft/Windows device. This device maybe has to be domain joined. If it's not domain joined, it will not work. This device maybe has to have encryption, BitLocker encryption. This device maybe has to have MFA, multi-factor authentication. This device has to have a certain build. So if it's Windows, it has to have a certain build of Windows. It has to have certain security. So you can see where we're going with this. So if your device you're using doesn't meet certain criteria, or that user or that client's device doesn't meet certain criteria, he or she or it will not be able to access this resource, whatever it might be. It's most likely going to be some sort of application 10 to 1. Alright guys, so that is what Azure Active Directory is, and that is some of the benefits, at least the basics of Azure Active Directory and the basic benefits of Azure Active Directory. I hope this makes sense. I hope you guys have learned something, and if you have, please give the video a like. If you'd like to know when the next episode gets released, remember to hit that subscribe button down below, otherwise you're not going to know when I release the next episode for this series. And then lastly, guys, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsors of this channel. So very much thank you to the sponsors of this channel. Really do appreciate it, guys. And if you guys would like to sponsor this channel too, so I can continue making more videos like this, you can find that information in the video description down below. Alright guys, see you in the next video.
If you love me, let me know. If you don't, then let me.